off as well. So just to say who I am, I'm Deirdre Cijffers. I'm lead course designer at Cambridge University Press in the online learning services team, and also in the technology enabled learning program across the university. My main background is in teaching and in teacher training, and then kind of second half of my career moving into online teaching and teacher training. So I've got lots of experience of delivering in the classroom, but also in the online space as well, which is where we're going to be today. And a little known fact is that before any of this teaching business happened, I once had a job in a library. So I identify a little bit with your situation. With anybody else, I would say that I've been a librarian, but I don't think I can get away with that with this group today. But it is a very, very, very nice job to be, a really nice connection with your community that I hope we'll manage to maintain as we go online and still try to connect with people from there. So I'm just going to turn this off so that I can maintain Wi-Fi, and let's get started. Okay, so introducing libraries online. So we're not introducing online libraries, we're introducing your libraries online. And what this refers to mainly is the introduction that you provide to students as they arrive in Cambridge. What do they need to know? How do they need to know about it? So the aims for today is to cover the kinds of things that you would like to cover in your introduction when it comes to October and you've got students who would have been rolling through your doors, kind of signing up to your online meetings. So what is the purpose of those meetings? What about the physical space? So a library obviously is a physical space, but it's so much more than that. And how do we get around the issue of COVID has forced us all away from sharing physical spaces, but we still need to introduce them because people still will be using them. Then we'll look at things like content and connection. So how you give ideas to people, how you give material to people, and how do you maintain time to keep working on the connection with the individuals and with the communities around your subjects and your libraries. And from that, we will look at a new approach of dealing with introducing the libraries and what's in them and around them, and demonstrating things, which should be quite an exciting part. Hopefully you'll get the blood pumping on a hot day straight after lunch. And then the last section here is fostering community, which we may or may not have time to get to. I've got the slides in so you can see them later on if we don't have time, but I'm doing something new today, so it might take a bit longer than planned. So I'm going to ask you to contribute to today's session in two ways. So the two icons at the bottom, the one on the left is for a tool called vevox, which is a polling tool. Has anybody used this before? If you have, can you just type yes in the chat box, please? And while I'm waiting, the other one with the speech bubbles is when I want you to chat. So on any particular screen, you'll see one or the other, and you'll need to contribute something in that way when we get there. So brilliant. Okay, so we've got one person who is familiar with vevox. That's great. Okay, so before we go anywhere and do anything, I would like you to go to this address and put in the ID that's on the screen. I'll give you a minute to do this. Okay, if you do it on your phones, so much the better, so you don't need to navigate away from the main screen of the talk too much. Cameras off, everybody, please. And so I'll go there as well, just to make sure we know, and I know how long you need. So it's vevox.app. And then type in the meeting ID. Okay. So this is the new part, right? So hopefully it will work. We had a little trouble with testing earlier on, but I think it should be okay. So we're going to start with a quick poll. So after your first session, your first introductory session of welcome to the library, here's what you can do. What do students need to be able to do after that first session with them? So if you go to the poll, can you type your responses into the space that appears? If you're using the desktop app, you'll need to press the blue button, the blue bar at the bottom of the screen, to find the text bit that comes in. But if you're on your app, it should come up straight away. I'll give you 10 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay. So this is the word cloud of the things that you've put in. They want to know stuff. This is great. They need to find and use things, use resources. I assume find the librarians, show that you're approachable. Great. Find items on iRead. Okay, find, borrow, return. Absolutely. Be comfortable. Find the catalog, and finding things is quite big. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is partly about finding things. It's also about knowing things and the kind of navigation, not just of what's online, but what is there face to face as well. So, given that at the moment there's no way to physically introduce people to the space. You can't have a group of 10 people together, huddled together. That's definitely not socially distant. So we have some options that might be a little bit more appealing. And we've got an example of something slightly similar. Do we have John or Amy in the room today? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to show you the first section of this video. It's very short. It's a minute and a half, which is perfect. And it's a really nice way of looking at what a library looks like from the inside. So let's have a quick look at this just now. Okay, I'm not sure if you could hear the music there, but I'm sure you could see that it's a really dynamic, nice way of walking around a library, showing people what's there, what the feel of the space is, and most importantly, that there is a friendly, knowledgeable, approachable face that that students can come and talk to afterwards. How long, and please type your answers in the chat, how long do you think it took to make this? And Amy, you're not allowed to answer. An hour, 3 hours, quite a lot all day. Okay, we've got a good range there. So according to Amy, this took an afternoon to make. So it's not a huge commitment necessarily. And what John and Amy were aiming to do was just introduce the space. This is our space, right? And it was separate from an introduction, induction type of context. So what we're talking about today might be a little bit more involved. So in this one, we've got great physical orientation of what's where, and we've got the face of the library is definitely introduced. A question for you in the chat. what else could we include if we're going to use this type of video as a way to introduce the libraries at the start of a year? What else might we like to put in there? So answers in the chat, please. Door access, yeah. Lose, yeah. Accessibility of the various parts of it. Students, yeah. Oh, a student presenter, nice. Yeah. Other staff members. Is there obviously going to be more than one friendly face? Yeah. Systems, yeah. Catalog searching, okay. Okay, so you've got lots of options, and there are lots of things in your introduction that won't be covered in this type of video. Class marks and locations, yeah. I mean, it would be great if you had like a floor plan type thing that showed um, that showed it does do the job. It's excellent. But what would also be nice is maybe a floor plan with class mark ranges, so that people would have a little bit of direction that they could get before they come in. So some of the things that I thought of, or maybe talking like a quick introduction of the specialization of the library, collections, what collections you have there and where they are, the special ones. And given that you're trying to show your friendly face, the staff who are on hand. So obviously in the library you'll have people who are specialized in different things, or people who would be helpful for particular things or in particular locations maybe. But you could have, at every point where John has stopped, you could have somebody stopping and saying, this is where we keep the XYZ collection. This is where you'll find the jigsaws. So having somebody at each stopping point. So in this video, we followed John around, which was a really nice way of doing it, and the kind of speeding up the footage was fantastic. But if you have lots of people who work there and who you might want to introduce as you normally would in your walk around, then we don't necessarily need to follow someone around, but the camera person could walk on their own to a place, and there they meet let's say there they meet Amy, and then they move on to another place, and then they meet John, so that each person gets a smaller snippet to talk about, rather than having one person doing all the things. So just if this sounds scary to anybody, you don't necessarily have to do it all or be on camera all the time. If that's something that would affect your feelings about it. Would we want the video to be longer? I think 2 to 3 minutes at absolute outside. So you want to keep it to the physical things rather than necessarily the systems. So you would maybe show where the self-issue thing is, but not show them how to use it necessarily. So if you want to introduce a little bit more personality to it for you, or for one of your for any of the faces of the library, you could have everybody say what their favorite title is, and maybe that would be something that would define who stands in what area of the library. Maybe your favorite spot in the library. I saw there was a lovely video of the best desk, or my favorite desk. It would be nice for the library staff and maybe existing students to say, this is a really good spot, it's really quiet and it's not far from the coffee machine, etc. And the self-issue system, which people will need to know how to use, but it might be more effective if collectively you did one of those and made it available alongside this, which would each kind of give across a personality of each library and give a bit of character to both the people and the place that it's in. And then if you're doing any speaking at all, you would need to have captions on there as well. But if you're scripting it, then the captions are easier to manage. So this, I think, would be a very nice way of introducing the physical space without having to bring everybody in and risk lots of infection. And although I saw the data from Cambridge is really, really good just today, but still the risk is not zero. So these are your options of things to include, and it would involve speaking and scripting, which I think would be a very interesting way of going about it. So I know that the big question now is, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. So as I said, Amy has confirmed for me that this took an afternoon to do. So she and John planned their route and then decided what they were going to show. And they planned their route so as not to duplicate, kind of cross over where they'd been walking. So that will be important. I think if you're going to do something that's a little bit more involved with the information and the faces, then it would probably take a day for the face or faces and the camera person to do the whole thing. And Amy, you can tell me if that sounds unreasonable. And you need to plan what you want to say, so script it. Don't necessarily follow your script when you're talking, but do have a good idea of what it's going to be, where you want to say that, and how you're going to get around. So whoever is involved, you've got all those options there. And the more planned you are, the quicker it will go on the day. And Amy's big piece of advice was to get used to your editing tool. She used iMovie on her phone. This could be any other editing tool that you're familiar with or that you can get easily, but do get kind of familiarize yourself with it before you start. You don't want to commit to something and then realize that it's absolutely not doable at all. But you've got a lovely librarian network community. I'm sure people will be able to help each other out as well. Then the filming itself, it doesn't take that long. Editing, depending on how many edits there are required, is the bit that would take a little bit longer. But if you get to a point where you've taken something a couple of times and you're not 100% happy with it, it might be best to take a break and film it again rather than spend hours editing on it later on. And then once it's done, you need to share it. Share it on YouTube, share it through Cam Guides, your library website, on Moodle. There are lots of different options, and that's up for you as a collective to decide how you want to do that. Ideally, as an ecosystem of libraries, you would all have a decision that you have made so that students always know where to find. If they're looking for the video for X library, they know that it's in a specific type of area on the website or on Moodle, etc. So they don't have to figure it out every time if they have access to more than one library. So does this sound doable or super frightening? Can you type in the chat box whether this sounds like an interesting way to go about it? Okay, that's great. Brilliant. I'm delighted to hear it. Okay, yes, it is a little bit both. Everything that's new is always a little bit daunting, but it looked like John and Amy had fun on the day, and it's very personable, so it is very nice. So it's a really nice way of getting around doing your face-to-face session, which is really, really close contact. Yeah, and you've got fantastic videos, and Amy looks like she is the person to ask as well. Okay, so already, right, a video on YouTube or on the UL YouTube channel or on your websites, whatever, that all sounds fairly normal. These are the kinds of things we do, but in actual fact, it's already a significant departure from how you might have visualized doing your introductions in the past. So in the past, the past is like 3 months ago. So previously, before COVID happened, we used to do things together, and we used to do them at the same time in the same place. They were synchronous. So it generally involved an in-person experience where everyone was together at the same time. It involved making friends. So for your first years there, it's another opportunity for them to meet more people in their subject or in their area, which is not necessarily going to be the case this time. You're also looking at the physical space, and because of that, there are also conventional behavior expectations. No shouting. I shushed a lot of people that one summer, and other topics covered during the same event. So you're looking at using different systems and that kind of stuff, which is great. But in this type of video, it doesn't fit. What you want is a nice, succinct, short, let me show you around, and that's great. So it's kind of standalone. So basically, as soon as we add this play button, we change everything. So it seems really normal, and it's totally to be expected, and we all watch Netflix and YouTube and all the rest all the time. But it is a departure for training people to use the library. So once people can choose when to press play and when to press pause, it's asynchronous. We are no longer together. It's a remote experience, which is good for safety, and also for people who are uncomfortable being in crowds and for whatever reason. It's convenient because people can watch it whenever they feel like it, but we need to be careful that they do manage to watch it if they need it. It's also solitary and it's standalone. So solitariety, that's not a word. Um, Being solitary is not a problem. It's but it is something that we need to think about, because university is as much a social experience as it is everything else. So we need to make sure that now that we've taken out the social aspect of this experience, we need to put the social back in somewhere else. And equally, it's standalone content. It's just one thing. So we need to bring our other topics in another way at another time. So either that will be more standalone content that they access asynchronously, or it will be something that we incorporate into a synchronous session, something like what we're doing today. So synchronous is in person, face to face. It's also far away as we are today, but we are still together at the same time. So we've got our asynchronous and we've got our synchronous options. So we're looking at content, which is our video, connections, which would be our discussions, and sense making. So we need to make sure that people are not just listening to stuff and maybe taking notes or maybe not, but they're actually making the sense that is required for them. And in your time for connections, that's when you check that sense has been made of the content as well and of the activities. So in the classic view, synchronous was where we did everything. So we did presentations, we did learning activities, which might have been individual, might have been in pairs, and because of the pairs and the group work and the group discussions, we represented, or we drew out the student voice both in opinion and question, and we also tried to make sure that the students had understood what we hoped that they would understand, and that they are able to do what we hope they are able to do. And obviously we're consolidating the face, so we're consolidating your presence as the friendly, approachable, knowledgeable person to ask about all things informational. So this was our original view. Then we had an entirely online view. So all of these things are possible completely asynchronously as well. So in content, we've got the video we just talked about, other resources like cam guides and screencasts of how you do different things. We've got, for sense making, we do learning activities online, which could include online quizzes. And then we've got online conversations and online community. And those two things can cross over quite a bit. And if we get to community, I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But all of that is possible. What we normally tend to do, though, is we split it down. There's a line between the kind of passive things and the active things. So asynchronously, people access content. So they watch a video, they read a resource, and then synchronously, they do a learning activity to make sense of what they did and prove that they've made sense of it. And they do pair work to get together, and then all of that representation of student opinion and question and their connection with you, their connection with each other, all of that comes up in synchronous time. We could also, and this is a very valid model, and it's probably something you're doing already, because you do have a lot of stuff online already, but it might be that this coming October, you might want to think a bit more concertedly about what you want the actual journey for students to be when you get there. So this is lovely. Another one that is slightly more advanced, because you'd have to make activities online, is this one. So instead of having the sense making only in synchronous time, we can do the sense making activities online and then keep the synchronous time purely for connections, even running things like clinics or Q&A time or office hours, they're often called. So people do all of their learning asynchronously, and then they only have to be in synchronous time for that one thing to genuinely connect with people, which is a lot of the advice out there from the experienced institutions is to put as much as you can asynchronous, put as much content as you can asynchronously, and as much activity as you can where feasible, and then make sure that you keep that synchronous time so that people can work out the kinks when they get to speak to you. They can ask the expert, they can be put back on the right track if they've gone off on tangents. And it's a really important time, especially now that we're so isolated, although slightly less now, but that so much is still isolated and so much is still unsure. Having the connection, having the time to talk to people together is still really important, whether or not you spend a lot of time getting content across. So once you've decided which of those you want to go for, if any, what you need to do is map. You need to map things for your students. So before you can do any mapping, you need to decide where you want to go. So obviously for your context, what does an information literate student look like at this stage? So not information literate up and down the scale, you've got the framework for that, but what does an information literate student look like who is ready to start studying, find the books they need, find the resources they need, all of that stuff to enable them to use the libraries effectively to support their studies. The libraries and indeed the librarians to get the best out of the amazing resources that are available for them. Once you've decided where the destination is, what they look like, you've effectively articulated your learning outcomes at this point. So ideally, as you do it, you want to use active verbs. So by the time they're finished this session, they will be able to, and not use know or understand, but use find, differentiate, explore, investigate. So keeping the verbs active so that it's something that is measurable and you can see whether or not it has been achieved at the end. Because if it's something about knowing, that's quite hard to see during a discussion. Once you have your destination, you need your directions. How will new students get to that point? And that is the stops. So you need to plan in the stops. What content do you want to provide? What activities do you want them to do? And what interactions do you want them to have with you, with your colleagues, and between them as peers and as a community? So I'm sure you have loads of this already. You've been doing this for years face to face. You've got tons of stuff that is repurposable or usable. So once you have this general map of the destination and the directions, in preparation for this October, you need to review your existing materials, mine them for all the gold that is in them, and decide whether each material or each section of material, what is it for? Are you giving content? Are you asking them to do something for sense-making purposes, or are you asking them to talk to each other and make connections, human connections? So once you've done that and you can see from what you've done before what you've created and what it can be used for, then it's easier to see which you could put online and which you could keep for a synchronous session. So it's about filtering what you have rather than creating lots of new stuff. And also, even if in your own materials you don't have the stops that you decided the students needed to do to reach their destination, as a network, you have a vast amount of resource out there. So it's a question of curating what's out there. And things like CAM guides, there's loads and loads of information in CAM guides, and students can dip in and out and do whatever they want. It might be that at the very beginning, you've got new students who are getting loads of information thrown at them from lots of different directions. They're not going to remember tons of it, but what you might want to do is link to a specific piece in CAM guides, which will not only give them the information that you want them to find in that section, but will also raise awareness of CAM guides as an entity. Like, oh, so this is here. So I found what I need for this particular journey, but I've also found this amazing resource that I can use at another time in more detail. So think of it as kind of signposting to specific items within larger resources so that you get the stop on the journey, but you also get the realization of quite how much is out there that they can come back to later on. Because asking them to look at everything in the beginning is just going to really overwhelm people and mean that they don't really realize the value of it properly in good time. So you might be curating existing materials, both yours and those of the network. You might be creating your videos. I hope you're going to create your videos. I look forward to seeing some if you do. And whatever else you've decided is a useful stop on the journey to that destination that you've defined in the beginning. And then you really do need to map it out. And that can be a map in Moodle. So maybe you say, you've got a checklist with some instructions and the purpose of why everybody does different things. It could be a sheet with some links on it. It doesn't have to be very high tech, but it does have to be clear, and it needs to show what people need to do in order to get to the point where, okay, I'm ready now. I've done all these asynchronous activities and looked at all this content. I am ready to go to a live session and have my questions answered, etc. So there are lots of different ways of going about it. there's lots of different technical ways of going about it, but I'm sure you've got ample resource to have a look at how that might happen within the university generally and within the network of libraries specifically. So another thing that that you guys have to do is demonstrate how systems work, I understand. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little activity. We'll do a little demonstration activity. I'm not going to show you anything, but you are going to find a piece of information in one of the systems that you know. So basically, we're going to navigate away from this space here. I want you to go and find something and then come back and tell me what the answer is. So before we do that, what kinds of things do you need to discover? To demonstrate. And I'm going to open the poll. So if you go back to your phone or your other window, or your cup of tea, if it didn't work for you, hopefully not tea today, and write in the answer in the box. I'll give you 20 seconds. Three, two, one. Okay. Whoops. Oh no. Okay, I've managed to delete it by mistake. Go on, go again. 10 seconds, just to give me a few answers. Sorry about that. I'll stop when I get to 15. Okay, done. Closing. Okay, I discover, okay, is the biggest one, and I think probably the most universal to everybody. Then lots of databases, Moodle, yeah, self-issue, definitely. I think the self-issue one would be really good as a video with a person in front of it. So with iDiscover, you can do, and databases, you could do screencasts and things, but the self-issue one might be nice with a person. Finding things, definitely using the catalog, e-resources, libguides, yeah, great. Okay, so there's lots of demonstrating, and yes, you do have to demonstrate that you're friendly. You have to do that all the way through. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to do a little activity synchronously. So normally you've still got your two options. You've got asynchronous options and synchronous options. So asynchronously, you could do a screencast, which is a video of what happens on the screen, and this one is one that I found on the library website. And it's literally just a video of watching somebody click where to go. And they're very, very common and relatively easy to do. There are lots of downloadable tools that you can use, and you can record off the screen using Windows G. And on a Windows machine, it's very easy to do as long as you've planned it in advance, and it's really helpful. Oh, so you've had students record using a self-service machine before. Brilliant. Let's get them to do it again, or get that same one and share it with everybody else. Great. So there's loads of videos. That's fantastic. So what you want to do is make sure in your synchronous session that they have watched and understood and are now able to use iDiscover when they come in. So you can also, if you want to tone it down technically, you can do a step-by-step guide as a document with or without screenshots. And there are arguments for and against screenshots. For this, I would err on the side of having screenshots, but sometimes in order for learning to occur, more sense making needs to happen, and if you don't have the screenshots, they have to think about it harder. But I think at the beginning of the year, you don't really want anybody to have to think about these things too hard. You just want to get them in and using it straight away. Synchronously, you have two ways of doing this. So you can demonstrate in lockstep, or you can demonstrate freeform. So if you're in lockstep, basically, you put all the URLs on the screen, your instructions are on the screen, and everyone is at the same pace. So your steps are locked to mine. So I say, everybody press the green button, and you all press the green button. Now everybody type in this word, and you all type in this word. So it can take a bit longer. It's quite passive on the part of the students, but it means that it definitely means that nobody gets lost, and anybody who does kind of veer off the correct path can be brought back in really easily. So there are advantages and disadvantages to that. So if people weren't really present mentally at the time, they might still have questions afterwards, but that's okay because you've shown your friendly face, so they can come back to you. The other option is to make it more freeform and set a task, ideally using breakouts so people can do things together, and then you would need to have close monitoring to make sure that you don't lose anybody or polls. Probably both. So depending on the size of your group, if you have 10 people and you break them into 5 groups of 2 or slightly larger groups, then they can work together very easily, and you can dip in and out of their breakout rooms. We don't have breakout rooms on Teams, but if you've been using, you were using Zoom this morning, and that definitely has breakout rooms that are technically very easy to manage. And then you want to use polls, especially if you've got a larger group, so that you can see the answer at the end of what result people had out of their activity. So both of those are possible. So let's have a go. Okay, so we're going to do a quick task. Fingers on buzzers. We're going to go around the libraries in 80 seconds. So your mission, there are 4 steps to this. So step 1, I want you to log in to iDiscover, please. And even if you were logged into it earlier on, I'd like you to go back and make sure that your login session is still active. You have 10 seconds to go and do that, please. 3, 2, 1. Is everyone logged into iDiscover? Just type yes in the chat box if you are. If I've got 10, that's plenty. Great. Okay, I knew you'd get in really easily. Oh, slow connection. Okay, right. So you're going to have to type really fast then. Okay, so step 2 is what I actually want you to find, but I'm not going to tell you about that just yet. When you have found what I want you to find, I want you to answer the question on vevox. So I'm not going to open the poll yet. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to find the treasure, and then I will open the poll. So I want you to answer the question on vevox, and then I want you to type the name of your library in the chat to show you've finished. So the first library back wins the admiration and envy of their colleagues for 19 more minutes. But the question goes on vevox and the name of the library in chat. So in chat, can you tell me, when you find the answer, do you type the answer in chat? No, correct. The answer goes in vevox. Okay, so you're all logged in, you're all ready. I would like you to please find out who owned copy B of the 1922 version of Worst Journey in the World, currently held at the Scott Polar Research Institute Library. Go! Okay, I'm opening the poll now. Oh, we've got one answer. But nobody's willing to say who they are in the chat yet. I got 10 more seconds. A few more answers now. Oh, you've crashed iDiscover. Okay, engineering is claiming the flag. Oh dear, have you genuinely crashed iDiscover? Oh dear. Okay. All right, we've got 11 responses. So I'll close it now. And of the 11, 64.29 of you said George Seaver, who is the biographer for many members of the team, and it was in fact his copy. Apsley Cherry Garrard, which I have difficulty saying, was the author of the book. Kathleen Scott is the wife who actually went, and I don't remember who Eldred Wilson was. George? Okay, takes too long on the phone. Fair enough. Okay, anyway, to all 11 of you, especially to the 64.29% of people who got it right, congratulations. Much kudos to you. Yes, exactly. Edward Wilson? Anyway, let's move along. Okay, so obviously with so many people on what seems now to be a delicate system, Wilson was the illustrator. Yes, of course. Thank you. We've managed to get somewhere. So let's just quickly analyze the task. So hopefully this will be um, a usable format for you for your demonstrations. So obviously I was trying to do this really quickly, and there are a lot of people going into the same space. This is not necessarily how you're going to do that with people, and hopefully not everyone will come in and try and do it on a phone. So, but you can't guarantee that everybody will have a desktop or a laptop to be able to work on. So, was the task in lockstep or freeform? Answers in the chat, please. Yes, it definitely started. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of both. So we started in lockstep, and then I set you free and then didn't tell you where to go, because telling you where to look for something in a particular library would have been a total waste of time, because you know how to get there. So if you were doing this with your students, you might want to lockstep a little bit further, but then leave them free to find something. So this would be a way of demonstrating how to find books, especially if you have a floor plan of your library. If you find the class marks within iDiscover and then find that on the floor plan, you could use this to demonstrate any of the things in any of the systems. This is it slightly flips the demonstration model. Rather than showing everybody how to get exactly to a point, you tell them where the point is, and then hopefully you can give them some locked steps, and then they can be free to make logical, intuitive decisions that will then be much more memorable for them later on. So a bit of both, depending on your audience, depending on the level of expertise, depending on how familiar they are with these types of systems, all of those things. It's a decision for you to make. Neither is better than the other. What 3 tools did we need to use for the task? Answers in the chat, please. Anybody? iDiscover, vevox, and Teams chat. Yes, access to the internet. Yeah. Okay. I like it that it's called iDisco. I'm going to stick with that. It's cool. And an internet connection, absolutely. Okay, so those 3 things, none of them individually are difficult to use, and even if they're slightly difficult, they're probably not impossible. You just need to dedicate a little bit more time to it. But if I'd said at the beginning of the session, right, we're going to do this demonstration, we're going to need to use 3 tools, I think your perception of what we were going to do might have seemed really complicated, but in actual fact, it is a replication of something that you can do face to face, and that you would probably do face to face. And because I built in the vevox bit earlier on, it wasn't a new thing to you at this point. Undiscover. Because we'd been using the chat already, that wasn't a new thing to you at this point. And discover is the target system that you want to learn about for your students, so that it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So if you're going to do something like this, you need to build up the steps and the tools quite gradually, so that you are scaffolding the process for the students and for yourselves as well. You don't want to have to get in and set up 3 things all at the same time. It's pretty stressful. Okay, how did you feel about navigating away from the session? Did you think you might get lost and not come back, or were you pretty confident about that? Fine, good. Okay, a little bit hassled, pretty confident. Okay, you've got 2 screens, brilliant. Okay, yeah, again, it depends on the internet. Okay. Okay, so you have there's a reason why I use the 2 things as well. So in general, it's not that big a deal. If your internet is slow, there isn't really anything that we can do about those things. But what you need to do is factor in lots of time. And time is really the most flexible part of this. You just plan in more time. Generally, your students will be okay with navigating away and coming back. Quite possibly this was maybe the first time for lots of you. It might be the first time for other students of being in one place, and then you have to go away and then you have to come back, and it feels a little bit odd. But the more we do these things, the more used to the process everybody becomes, and the more sessions you attend that are like this, it just becomes more natural, and there's less of a sense of panic of like, I'm going away and I'm coming back, which is why I wanted you to use the vevox tool on your phone, so that we didn't have another navigate away reason. So ideally you want the majority of it all together, but that then gives you permission to come away once and come back. Don't do it a million times in one session, it's not okay, but once is perfectly reasonable. And given that we had vevox, what was the purpose of asking the question in vevox and not the chat? Any ideas in the chat box, please? To anonymize the responses, yeah. No spoilers, yes. To make sure it's displayed on the screen, yeah. It's easier for me to see the results, absolutely. It's also easier for me to see what proportion of the group have answered. So I get a counter, I'm not sure if it's on your screen, but of the 66 people who have signed into the meeting on vevox, I can see what proportion of people have answered. So I can wait until I've got 70%, 70% response. And it does give confidence to responder, especially if you've got shyer students or people who are more uncomfortable with being in the group and don't want to put themselves forward. It's really, really valuable. What it is, though, is completely separate from our meeting. So there are other questions. So I asked you to put your library name in the chat and not in vevox. Why did I do that? And interestingly, lots of people declined to do that. We only got a couple of libraries who said. They're more keen to talk in chat during sessions because they're in person. Yep. So asking people to respond in chat for public recognition, yes, because essentially it moves the conversation forward. So if you're asking people to say things in chat, you're asking them to contribute to the discussion and to the direction of the conversation. Yeah, for this, it made it a bit competitive. You are probably a group who know each other relatively well, and you all exist in the same context. So you want a little spice, and exactly it pulls you back into the presentation. So you have to come back. So these tools, yeah, it's just chat, or yeah, it's just a poll, but you can use them really judiciously and use them for far more purpose than is on the tin. So for chat, I like it because it's not anonymous. So yeah, and you have to talk to me and you have to talk to each other. And earlier on, when we were talking about different things, we have people responding to each other, and oh yes, and we have and there's another video, and there are lots of different ways that you can talk to each other in the way that you would in a face-to-face session. It's not just all of us sitting on our own in rooms everywhere else. So chat does that where vevox or a polling tool just doesn't do. But the polling tool does allow anonymity and confidence, and then gives it a more complete picture of who's answered. So by all means, experiment with the ones that you feel most comfortable with. Obviously, chat technically is the simplest. There's a little bit of learning about vevox in particular. In Zoom, they have a built-in polling tool, but it doesn't work in breakout rooms. So experiment a little bit together, practice. I often hijack our team meetings by, I just want to try out this thing. So, do that to each other as well. Okay, and community. We have 6 minutes left, so I'm just going to touch on this quite briefly. So community is something that's very important, and libraries are obviously a key part of the university community and of the student community, and the students are a key part of your community. But community doesn't build itself. As I'm sure you know, even with COVID, you're probably still not friends with all of your neighbours. You might be friends with more of them because of COVID since the beginning, but not necessarily with all of them, because you don't have a reason to talk to everybody. So you need, as community leaders, as the librarians in the library community, you are the leaders of those conversations. You need to get things going, get things started, and there are various ways that can be done. Right? So you can work on doing that in your synchronous sections, but you also have asynchronous ways using forums in Moodle, or maybe using the chat function in Teams, but I'm not sure how that works for students. You'd need to investigate that. So there are lots of different ways that you can do it, but you need to be present, and people won't just talk to each other because they're there, but they will talk about something that you'd like them to speak about. So an example that I gave in the recent remote teaching webinar series was one from STEM Start, from Lisa Jardine Wright. And on the top right of the screen, there's a screenshot from her introductory video. But if you're going to do your library introduction videos, then that part is kind of covered. But when you're looking at generating community and generating discussion online, you need to introduce something, you need to structure something, you need to respond to people. And there are some examples on the screen here on the right hand side of there were activities that went on online, and then in her tutorial, her live tutorial, she congratulated the two colleges. They were split into college groups with the highest turnout for an activity. She said she kind of named and famed people. I've seen some great examples in the forum and quoted a couple of people. And then you respond to students both, and you answer their question, or you draw in their viewpoint, or you comment on the data that's there. I have not added vevox to Teams as an app, but I will answer that question in a minute. And you want to give feedback and name names. And this as an icebreaker. So one of the things that you need to do is break the ice, obviously, and get people started. And often it's like, give an introduction, introduce yourself, tell us something about yourself. And it's kind of a paragraph. It's really awkward, and it takes ages to write, because how do you introduce yourself without, you want to seem fun, but knowledgeable, but cool, but, it can be quite a difficult thing to write. So the icebreaker that Lisa and I chose to use was a mind map of ourselves. So everybody had to do this various thing, and you got a lot of information across with very few words and a little bit of scribbling. So that was very nice. And the very important thing is the instructions, and I'm not going to go through them right now, but you can read them later when you get the slides. The instructions are quite wordy, but every section of it has a really important part to it. But the idea is, with the task itself, you don't need to rely on a word count. You don't necessarily want to go down that route. Another icebreaker that I really enjoyed in a session at a design conference that I attended was this. So we were asked on a post-it to draw and this is what I drew. Can anybody tell me what this is? I mean, my obvious artistry should communicate it completely perfectly. A clown on a unicycle. Yes, it is a clown and a fairy on a unicycle. A juggler. Yes, there are no balls in the air there, but good idea. So it was in fact a clown and a fairy on a unicycle, and I was given a card that said clown and a fairy on a unicycle. Sketch this in 30 seconds and explain how this relates to your role. So I then had to explain how this works with learning design. So I work with academics. So this to me was me and an academic doing a carefully balanced thing that we had to do together, going to an unknown destination, and it was never clear which one of us was the clown and which one was the fairy with the magical powers. So it and you had to think of it really fast. So it was, again, it's not about words. It's not about I was born in Dublin and I studied this and I'm really interested in microbiology. It's it's a fun snap out of the way you would normally introduce yourself into doing something very creative that taps into lots of different processes in your brain, and makes this happen. So we don't need to rely on the words that we normally rely on. We can get to those later. Right now, it's just, it really, really breaks the ice. And most people's responses were really funny. So we had a great time after that. 1 minute to sum up. Move as much content as you can to asynchronous delivery. So that could be video, could be website, could be text, whatever way you want to do that. And create a journey that makes sense and is clear to everybody what's expected of them and what they need to do and what you want to provide to them and what you expect of them in the end. Use polls and chat judiciously and with purpose. So use enough that people are not going to fall asleep postprandially on a hot afternoon, but also so that they don't get irritated with having to respond to you all the time. Don't be afraid to go off platform. It feels scary the first couple of times, but it's not so terrible and people will generally find their way back. And if you're going to do that, maybe you might want to warn your students in advance that they'll be using two things and it would be better for them to be on a laptop than on a phone or a tablet so that you've got a bit more flexibility. Free yourself from the constraints of words. As a group, I'm sure we all love words. You've just listened to loads of them from me, but they're not always the best way of breaking the ice if you're starting to generate community. And that's it from me. And I apologize that I haven't left any time for questions. But if you want to know more about any of these things, the remote teaching webinar series is 5 webinars, all recorded and available on the CCTL website. The link is in the slide, and it covers delivering sessions live, both to large groups and small groups. It also covers creating video and other resources, and it covers the learning journey, and it covers generating and maintaining community. So please feel free to go through all of those. Thank you very much. So that resource is there for you. There's the recording, there's the slides, and there are adjunct materials that you can go through that point to other resources as well. And if you like, please follow us on CamTelp. And if you have any questions, apologies that I can't stay, please do feel free to email me at dcijffers@cambridge.org. I'd love to hear from you, and thank you very much.